What do you think? I watched Price is Right yesterday, and I saw that they have guys doing this now. Anyways, that was just for fun. We, this week, are doing a little bit of a push to support Hope Farms. We know a lot of people are drinking more coffee at home than at Starbucks, or even here at the church. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make whole bean coffee available to you. It is Colombian roast, but it is supporting the Hope Farms in Honduras. So if you'd like to grab a delicious bag of whole bean coffee, I don't think this is my future. I just don't think it's a good career for me. Anyways, if you'd like to grab a bag, all you got to do is let me or Will know. Contact us. If you don't have our contact info, you can email us at either eric@reachjacks.com or will@reachjacks.com. Let us know when you want to come by, and we can set it up. They're only $10, and with it, we'll also make you a free espresso drink. So please come on by, support a great mission, and love to see you guys. We've already had some people come through today. It's been great seeing people and a little bit of fellowship. Keeping our distance, being safe, don't worry about all that stuff. Anyways, guys, excited to be back with you. It's Tuesday, so we're looking forward to a full week of devotions. We start today in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, and we go all the way through chapter 14. A lot of great application. We start in chapter 12, and it tells us about David's men. So now we've gone back into time, chronologically speaking, and we're now back looking again at David. David here has a group of guys. They're a bunch of misfits. They all meet him there at Ziklag. Well, Chronicles tells us something interesting about this group of guys. Notice it says in verse 2 of chapter 12, armed with bows, using both right hand and left hand, and hurling stones and shooting arrows with the bow. These guys were really talented guys, the studs of their day. But notice it goes on, they were of Benjamin, Saul's brethren. Isn't it amazing that Saul is chasing David around, and yet his own brethren go to where David is to be with David? I believe they saw true leadership in David. I believe that they saw a man who loved God, a man who loved Israel, a man who was a shepherd over people and a great leader. And even though they had family ties and allegiance to Saul, they broke those to follow David. What a great leader he must have been. Now, as we turn the page, we're still in chapter 12, but we see that David's army is growing. And it tells us in verse 18, then the Spirit came upon Amasai, chief of the captains, and he said, we are yours, David. We are on your side, O son of Jesse. Peace, peace to you, and peace to your helpers, for your God helps you. What I want you to see here is notice what happens when the Spirit of God comes upon an individual. The Spirit of God comes upon Amasai here, and what does he do? He unifies with David. You see, the Spirit, when the Spirit comes upon us, he brings unity. He brings peace. He brings clarity. And here we also see he brings submission. That Amasai looks at David and he says, you're God's anointed, and you're the one who I'm going to serve under. In other words, the Spirit of God, when he anoints us, there's humility in our life. We're not threatened by somebody else. Amasai was a general. He was a military leader. He looks at David, who's also a general, also a military leader. He doesn't feel a competitive spirit about him. He doesn't try to compare himself. He doesn't try to prove that he's a better leader than David. Instead, he simply submits to him. He sees David as God's anointed, and because of the Spirit of God upon him, he's willing to unify as well as humble himself. As we go on, we move into chapter 13. And here in chapter 13, we have a story it's kind of riddled with enigma. A lot of people have got a lot of issues with what goes on here. David, this is later in his reign than how Chronicles puts it, doesn't put it in chronological order. We'll see chapter 14 also takes a step back. So chapter 13 jumps in forward of chapter 12, and then chapter 14 brings us back. So here in chapter 13, David, it's at his point in his reign where he's calling for the Ark of the Covenant to come to Jerusalem. In chapter 13 and 14, he's not ruling in Jerusalem yet. But here in chapter 13, he is. And he calls for the Ark of the Covenant. And as it's coming, it tells us that Uzzah, who's carrying the Ark, he puts his hand up because the Ark begins to stumble. God gets angry, and God strikes him down dead. David then responds by getting angry with God, saying, our heart was right. We were wanting to do something that pleased you. We want to do something that made you happy. We're trying to bring the Ark of the Covenant here to Jerusalem, and you get mad that somebody was trying to hold it up so it wouldn't fall. Well, we see, guys, that good intentions are not an excuse for ignoring clear instructions. That God had given clear instructions on how the Ark of the Covenant was to be moved, who was to move it as well. And we see that Uzzah was not at least it's not listed that he was a Levite, and the Ark of the Covenant was being moved a way that God didn't want it to be moved. So while the intentions were good, the actions were wrong. Their heart might have been kind of right, but ultimately their heart to obey and do what God wanted, it was wrong. This is what I've called before the pragmatic gospel. That we think, oh, well, the ends justify the means. So as long as, our heart's right, well, then everything's okay. Well, no, listen, God has given us very clear command in Scripture on several different things. And just because we have a heart that's good, just because we have a heart that would want to please God in a matter, it doesn't mean that it's okay to then dishonor what the Bible says. But you see, we can easily think, oh, you know what? It's fine. Everyone in my society, everyone in my culture thinks that this thing is okay. You can imagine the people saying to David, if you want the Ark of the Covenant here, just go get it. Just have a bunch of guys put it on oxen and bring it here. And they certainly would have thought, Uzzah, if you see the thing about to fall, protect that thing. But in the end, God said, this is how I want you to carry it. And this is who I want to carry it. And whether you agree, whether you understand that, it doesn't matter. That's not what God's going for. God's saying, I want your obedience. I want your sacrifice, rather than a religious act, a religious, even public act, in front of the entire nation, bringing in the Ark of the Covenant. They did it the wrong way, and they had the wrong people do it. So even though their, quote, hearts might have been right in this, wanting to bring the Ark of the Covenant back, they were lazy in their relationship with God. And they said, oh, whatever, whoever wants to bring it can bring it however they want to bring it. And that was absolutely wrong. If you have a problem with that, well, then I suggest that you pray about it. Talk to God. We go on in chapter 14. We see that it says there in verse 2, so David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel. Notice this, for his kingdom was highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel. His nation is being blessed. It's beginning to increase, and as David's looking out and seeing this, I love that his heart doesn't swell with pride. His head doesn't grow and inflate. Instead, David sees the blessing as exactly what it is, a blessing from God. He doesn't say, well, look at my leadership. Look at what I've done. The reason why this nation is being blessed is because of me. How many other nations have a king like Israel's king? No, instead, he keeps his eyes on the Lord, and he says it's all from God. Now, last thing to point out, David then goes and defeats the Philistines. We know this is why chapter 14 is set before chapter 13. You can look into it if you like. But as he's going out to battle, notice what he does here in verse 10. And David inquired of God, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand? The Lord said to him, go up, for I will deliver them into your hands. David didn't see the Philistine army and say, you know what, I used to work for these guys. I know the ins and outs. I know all their weaknesses. I know how to beat them. He didn't go out in his own confidence. He didn't go out in his own strength. Instead, although he might have been confident in his ability, he still humbled himself and he still prayed. He understood that any victory is the Lord's victory. And so he went to him and said, God, is this what you want of me? Will you deliver them into my hands? You know that if God would have said no, David would have said, well, then what do you want to do? Because I'm not going to go fight them if you're not going to deliver them into my hands. I want to encourage you, whatever you're doing, even if it's an area of great skill for you, humble yourself, pray, and ask what the Lord would have you do with whatever that skill would be or whatever that situation would be. Great lesson of humility from David. And we see that the beginning of David's reign, it was covered with humility. It was also covered with blessing. I think humility is a rare trait, especially in our world. We're always told, promote yourself, man. Like, you got to put yourself out there. I don't see a lot of people saying, you got to humble yourself. You got to point to somebody else as greater than you. But that is truly what the Bible would tell us to do. that we are to point to God, we're to elevate him above ourselves, submit our will to his will, even if our will makes sense to us. Even if we go, well, there's nobody who would have any issue with this except for maybe the Bible. That's exactly where they're at in the beginning in chapter 13, and I want to encourage you, make sure that you're not there. Make sure that you are submitting your will to the Lord's will and doing whatever he says to do. It's very simple. All right, guys, God bless you, and hey, don't forget, Hope Farms, $10, whole bean, great. And we can also blend it, or grind it for you here. All right, God bless you guys, and we will see you again tomorrow at noon. Have a good one.